Hello, my name is Niall Crabtree, I am a game designer, and this is the third and final installment in the three-part Animal Crossing video essay series. This is also an extra special video because this is my first collaboration that I have ever done, and this is with the amazing Red Angel. You'll be hearing from them in just a minute, but if you would like to head over to their channel at any point during the video and subscribe, the link is the first one in the description. Now, in the first video in this mini-series, I concluded that Animal Crossing was a work simulator, as I determined that the core motivation for Animal Crossing involved work. Every motivation for Animal Crossing involved work, and the core goal from the developers was to simulate that process. However, that isn't to say that there isn't another huge schema in play here. A schema, for people unaware, is just a fancy designer word for mechanic. So if you ever hear me say the word schema, then just think mechanic. Anyway, the schemas at play here that are vital to Animal Crossing success are the social schemas. Schemas which directly affect how players interact socially with the game and with each other whilst they play the game. An example of social schemas in another game, say Splatoon, a competitive first-person shooter from Nintendo, are teamwork, being the hunter, and being the hunted. Now, teamwork can be split even further into positioning, communication, and all other aspects that are involved in that. But if we go down that rabbit hole, then we're going to have to talk about operations, which means we would have to cover all of this. So instead, let's stick to fluffy humanoid animals and the community of less fluffy humanoid humans that adore them, and also loathe them so very much. Anyway, take it away, Red Angel.
When Animal Crossing made its way to North America way back in 2002, I remember all of the commercials for it. Those real-world parodies, which didn't date them at all. It did. But it was intriguing enough to get me interested in the game and ask my parents for it. They obliged, purchasing Animal Crossing as well as a strategy guide. It came with a new memory card because a single Animal Crossing town required 50 megabytes of data, which for a Nintendo GameCube game is slightly insane. It took several sessions of gameplay for me to start enjoying it since I never encountered a game like this. I was a complete greenhorn, and while I was enjoying myself on the single-player run just fine, some help was required. This was when a friend of mine who also owned the game allowed me to travel into her town, take her fruits, socialize with her neighbors, and chat away with her by my side the whole time. This dynamic is part of the core of Animal Crossing, building a sense of community between players and not just their own animal villagers, but the villagers in other towns as well. All bets are off when Animal Crossing Wild World allowed you to talk to people online, visit them, and chat with them, and from there, the series only improved its ability to communicate with other players. The following behind the Animal Crossing series has been strong since the game's initial release, and that following has led to some fascinating theories about our favorite animals and what they do in their spare time. Greetings one and all, I'm Red Angel, and I'm here to give you a closer look at the Animal Crossing community, fan theories, and other intricacies of the Animal Crossing fandom. Hold on to your bells, this is going to be a deep dive. To begin our dissection of the Animal Crossing community, I think there's no better place to start than the website actually called Animal Crossing Community. There have been dozens of Animal Crossing guides out there, but this site is just special. It's entirely dedicated to the Animal Crossing community and all of the products and spin-offs. It informs you of upcoming events in your region, patch notes, provides community forums, and a safe place for Animal Crossing users of a younger demographic to be, with any older content shielded off in the grown-up gamers section. Even with sites like the Animal Crossing Wiki or Thonky being additional useful sources, I find myself going back to the Animal Crossing community more so than anywhere else due to it being a mainstay of the fandom since its inception. On October 28, 2002, AnimalCrossingCommunity.com was created and has been a site by the fans, for the fans. That is still going strong today, which gives it more than enough reason to deserve a mention. It also helps that many of the types of forum posts and fan content that appears on this site appears on the rest of this list. Think of it as a stepping stone for other forms of sharing amongst the Animal Crossing players that leads to some interesting results. Generally speaking, Animal Crossing has always been meant to be played with friends, New Horizons only adding to that with the amount of players that can come to your island at once. Back in the day, you had to play side by side with someone in order to get the same experience. But with Animal Crossing's usage of Wi-Fi, anyone can come to your town, which means you can hang out with people without being in the same room as them. And there's something special about that. If you can't celebrate your best friend's birthday because they live in Peru, do it in Animal Crossing. Want to show off the work you've done in your town? Ask your friend to come over in Animal Crossing. You can also invite complete strangers in if you want, but of course you do so at your own risk. The Animal Crossing community isn't lacking in dirtbags who would be completely willing and capable of destroying everything you love on your precious island. In fact, there are quite a few of them. This is why many players have been blacklisted, if not downright banned, from various outlets of the community. It's good that Nintendo put in so many fail-safes in New Horizons, not letting anyone chop down your trees unless they're marked as best friends. There are still things you can do that can ruin people's hopes and dreams, but you have to be really determined to do it. The best thing about New Horizons is it lets you interact with your friends and acquaintances without the fear of everything going down the toilet within 2 seconds. At worst, maybe just losing all your fruit in the process and being unable to sell them to Tom Nook, who is an interesting topic in the fandom to say the least. The duality of opinions on Tom Nook is fascinating to me, since even outside of the fandom, gamers as a whole have an idea of who Tom Nook is, and many of them are told the narrative that he is a heartless loan shark. You can find countless articles and think pieces dedicated to this very concept, not to mention all of the tweets alleging that Tom Nook is using child labor or violating some sort of housing laws, which obviously doesn't apply to Animal Crossing at all, but sure, go off I suppose. For those who have been in the fandom since the beginning, Tom Nook in the earlier games does come off as a shadier character. Especially in the first game, with your character arriving in town, him giving you a house and then suddenly telling you that you have a debt to pay. Yes, there is no interest on your debt, but there's more of a sense that he's forcing expansions on the player, pushing them more and more into debt. Yes, those expansions are nice, but at what cost? A gold statue in the middle of town dedicated to me? I'll take that debt, Tom Nook, you sneaky son of a gun. In all seriousness though, Nook is more of a duplicitous and enigmatic figure in the older games, leading to players coming up with countless reasons not to trust him, which makes sense. In the newer games he's much more upfront with you, and makes his intention clear from the start, rather than just showing up and giving you debt. Outside of some money-grubbing Nook memes, you'd assume that this was just harmless theorizing of gamers that were putting too much thought into a game about living your life in a quiet little town filled with animals. But oh no, my dear fledglings. I regret to inform you, one person decided to take this harmless series and take it 2 steps too far and too creepy. And I'm taking you on a first-class trip on the tourist side of town. Close enough to observe, but not deep enough to get lost. This is the terrible secret of Animal Crossing. A famous, or rather, an infamous story within the Animal Crossing community, one that rivals the likes of Cupcakes from the My Little Pony fandom in its portrayal of a relatively wholesome story and twisting it into a living nightmare. It uses the original premise of Animal Crossing Wild World for the DS, where you are dropped off in a strange town, put to work by Tom Nook to pay off your new house you automatically owe a debt on, and then living out your life in a strange town. As I stated earlier, the newer games were more abrupt in their introductions of the world to the player, providing a speedier integration into the core gameplay. There's not much story explanation in the game itself, which left more than enough room for stories such as this to be written. I should note, I'm not harping on the writing or the artwork of it. It's composed exactly how I expected a story like this to be written. It weaves an intriguing narrative, and I've spoken to many Animal Crossing fans that say that this underground story was how they discovered the series in the first place. While disturbing, I do find it fascinating that this story managed to rope people into this odd little life simulator game. It also helped color people's opinions on Tom Nook long before they knew who the character was. Amazing how a single piece of fandom can weasel its way into the public consciousness, isn't it? The Terrible Secret of Animal Crossing, or, as some in the fandom call it, Welcome to Camp, is a story by Chewbot. It has a huge fan following, and outside of the small pieces of fan art that I'm showing on screen, I'm going to avoid giving too much away. Additionally, due to the language and gory content of the story itself, I won't be discussing it too in depth here. But, suffice to say, if you're curious and want to go down a particular creepypasta-esque rabbit hole, then I'm certainly not going to stop you. I just needed to mention mention this story since we are talking about the fandom, and this story has been lurking in the shadows since its publication in 2007. Let's talk about something a little lighter, the relationships players develop with their villagers and how they can evolve into an obsession with getting the perfect dreamy villager. For reference, a dreamy is a dream villager, an animal that the player desperately wants but hasn't been able to get it because RNG and Animal Crossing go together like peanut butter and jelly. There are over 200 villagers available to move into your town, all with different designs and houses that express themselves in one way or another. The community is avid and at times very cooperative in helping you get your dream village, at a price, that is. Yes, there are the Animal Crossing villager cards available that guarantee you'll get your villager of choice, and they'll be forever trapped within your clutches for the next millennia or so. But that's not what I'm talking about. No. The villager black market is what I'm talking about. A system where, when a villager says they're going to move away or is up in boxes, they're put up on the market. Whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, or otherwise, characters can go for millions of bells, especially villagers at the top of the tier list. Yes, Animal Crossing has a tier list of villagers. At the top of the tier list at the moment is the character Raymond, who has successfully devastated the Animal Crossing black market and dropped hundreds of villagers down several ranks and several hundred bells in pricing. Nookazon, a Animal Crossing fan-run site that sells villagers and items, has the heterochromatic cat going for millions of bells and Nook miles. So what's the deal? Why are people so attached to these animals that can easily come and go as they please? The only thing stopping them is a word from the player saying, "No, don't go," when asking to move, and that's if the player catches them thinking about it. What makes someone want dream villagers so badly that they're willing to shell out millions of bells for them, let alone real-life money? Parasocial relationships. It's hardly uncommon for gamers to be playing Animal Crossing to become attached to a specific animal for one reason or another. New Horizons itself was marketed on the promise it was an island getaway that people may not have the opportunity to experience in real life. It's an easy way to get absorbed into the game and foster the parasocial relationships with the villagers. Despite each villager only having set dialogue and personalities to the point where they can be exchanged with other villagers of the same personality type, and while those outside of the player base may not see much of a difference, to the players themselves, it can be devastating. To briefly summarize, a parasocial relationship is a one-sided relationship between a person and the object of their obsession. This can be deemed unhealthy if the person themselves loses touch with all reality. I discuss this matter further in my parasocial relationships video, but suffice to say that your relationships with the villagers in Animal Crossing are entirely parasocial, one-sided, scripted, on billions of lines of code, in a separate reality from our own that we can leave at any time. The difference is, with Animal Crossing versus other similar games, and media in general, life goes on, whether you're there or not. That was one of the main marketing points of the original game. This furthers the idea that it's in its own pocket universe. However, this doesn't mean the relationships themselves are any less real or comforting to the players. Animal Crossing New Horizons, and honestly all other Animal Crossing games, are meant to be an escape from what your life is, in a strange yet beautiful world not unlike our own. The point of your existence in Animal Crossing isn't something as avant-garde as finding your life's meaning or true purpose. It's just meant as a place to relax, have fun, be creative, be yourself, even if you're surrounded by animals.
Thank you so much for that, Red Angel. I had actually never heard of parasocial relationships until I heard the audio clip that you guys have just heard for yourselves. And I can agree that parasocial relationships is something that most players that gel with the game experience for themselves. For me, I play Animal Crossing now, almost 3 months since the release of the game, just to make sure that Cube doesn't leave my village. I'm not saying conclusively whether that is a good thing or a bad thing because there are arguments for and against. For example, one argument against the social schema is that the motivation behind it is that of pain avoidance, which is something that I've covered in this mini-series before. You are playing because you don't want to be punished for not playing. This isn't great design, because as soon as I lose Cube, I am very unlikely to ever return to Animal Crossing. It's almost like a divorce. Though this isn't the same for every player, I'm sure. On the other hand, if my intentions were slightly different, say for example I hopped on Animal Crossing every day just to talk to Cube and see what they were up to, then that transforms the motivation into pleasure seeking rather than pain avoidance. If I miss one day of not talking to Cube, I'm not going to all of a sudden yeet my cart out of the window. Let's end this video by talking about community once more, as the community is what this video is all about. The community is the third pillar of success for Animal Crossing in my opinion. The pillars for me are the unique genre, the pitch perfect motivation schemas, and the community. These pillars are all interwoven and only work when they are perfectly intertwined. But they are all as important as each other, which is why I have dedicated an entire video to each of them. Like Red Angel mentioned, the community affects how villagers are represented in a hierarchy of popularity, which gives them an inherent value that is no different from an in-game marketplace with a dynamic economy, such as RuneScape or FIFA Ultimate Team. But the difference is that it is done completely outside of the game's ecosystem, via Facebook, Reddit or Twitter. There are no direct facilities that the game provides to the player to be able to do this easily, which is incredibly fascinating. The villagers have no actual value. They all have basic personalities that give them access to certain types of dialogue that they repeat. Say for example, if you have two villagers that are both a jock type, you can bet that they are going to say the same thing as each other one day. But a completely outside source, social media, players talking to players, a community, give these NPCs value. And that is so incredibly powerful. Thank you for tuning in to this last episode of this mini-series. It has taken me way too long to finish this up, and honestly, I don't know whether I could have done it without the help of Red Angel. Again, make sure to head over to their channel and subscribe. If you like my videos, you will love theirs. Also, I am currently posting on a weekly blog on my website, nowcrabtree.com, in which I talk about the game development work that I've been doing that week. So if you are interested in learning about game dev, including what I'm doing for my next board game, then please check it out and add it to your RSS feed. Thanks once more, and goodbye.